Hello, everyone. My name is Vagnozzi, and I'm a researcher in cosmology at the University of Cambridge. So, first of all, I would like to say that it's a pleasure to be speaking to an audience of young and bright minds, such as you. And I would, in particular, like to thank OM Trivedi for asking me to speak here today. That's really a pleasure and an honor. So today I will be talking about, in very broad terms, about the status of the field of cosmology today. And I want to highlight what some of the most important open questions in the field are. And another thing I would like to discuss, which is in particular targeted to this audience, is how do you get into research if you want to make a job out of trying to answer these questions? Okay, so here are my contact details. Feel free to write to me if you have any question following my talk. I'll try my best to answer in a reasonable time frame. So this is a rough outline of my talk. I'll first present a brief history of the universe as we think we understand it today. And afterwards, the central part of my talk is going to be discussing a personal selection of 10 of the biggest open questions in cosmology. These are some of the hottest questions in the field at the moment. And in the final part of my talk, I'm going to discuss some personal tips on how to get into research in cosmology, based partly skewed on my personal experience. Okay, so I'll start with a painting. And the painting is the following. I'll not attempt to pronounce the name of it. It's a painting, it's a wonderful painting by Paul Gauguin. And the title translates in English roughly to "Where do we come from? What are we? Who are we? And where are we going?" I've always been fascinated by this question because it represents, by this painting, because it represents some of the basic questions humankind has ever asked itself. Okay, so I think ever since the dawn of time, humankind has really been struggling with these questions and trying to come to terms with the meaning of life and its existence. Now, of course, these questions are sort of vague, but we can phrase them in more modern terms, okay? The modern version of these questions, in particular in cosmology, is as follows. So where do we come from becomes what were the universe's initial conditions? What are we made of becomes what is the universe made of? What's the energy content of the universe? And where are we going becomes how will the universe evolve? And it's remarkable that today in cosmology, we are able to at least tackle these questions, not only qualitatively. There was the realm of philosophy and religion for thousands of years, but actually we can do it quantitatively. And one of the reasons, actually, probably the main reason, is that we've got a lot of really precise data in cosmology nowadays. So I'm going to circle from the upper left corner. What you're seeing there is the so-called CMB, the cosmic microwave background. That's a snapshot of the infant universe. It's sort of like, it's really a picture of the baby universe. I'll come back to it later, actually, and that's a gold mine of information for us. If I move to the right, in the upper right corner, we've got a lot of gravitational wave detections over the past 5 years or so. And these are telling us a lot about the behavior of gravity on large scales. If I move to the lower right corner, last year in April 2019, we managed to capture the first ever picture of a black hole. And that provides another extremely important test of gravity on extreme scales. And finally, if I move to the lower left corner, what's being shown there is what you see there. These are millions of positions of galaxies and quasars. Quasars are supermassive black holes. And by studying how these extreme objects cluster as a function of scale, we can learn a huge amount of stuff about cosmology, including gravity, for example. And I mentioned previously that the CMB, the Cosmic Microwave Background, is a goldmine of information. This is the CMB sky as measured by the Planck satellite, which has brought CMB science to unprecedented levels. So what's been shown here, this is a heat map of how hot the universe was about 380,000 years after the Big Bang. Now, you can think of orange spots as being slightly hotter than the average and blue spots as being slightly colder. Now, the difference between hot and blue spots is extremely small. It's of order 10 to the minus 5 Kelvin. Okay, so we're looking at fluctuations of 1 part in 10,000 in the CMB sky. And these fluctuations, we think, later grew under the effect of gravity to become the structure we see today, including galaxies we see out there in the sky. So really, we are looking at the initial conditions for structure growth when we look at a CMB. And again, I can't stress how much information we've been extracting from these maps. Okay, so here's how we think the history of the universe occurred. So there was probably some initial singularity at time zero, which we colloquially refer to as the Big Bang in popular science. Now, a fraction of a second after the singularity, about 10 to the minus 32 seconds, we believe something called inflation occurred. Now, inflation is a period of accelerated exponential expansion, which stretched out the universe from being extremely tiny to macroscopic scales. Now, after inflation, what occurred is what we usually call the hot Big Bang expansion. Okay, so when in cosmology we speak about Big Bang, what we usually really think about is not this singularity at the start, but rather inflation. After inflation, the usual hot Big Bang expansion takes place. So the universe expands with time, and as it expands, it cools down. Okay, and as it cools down, what happens is that stuff can form. So initially, particles can form. You start to distinguish the four fundamental forces from each other. And 380,000 years after the Big Bang, something interesting happened. So initially, the universe was so hot and dense that everything was tightly packed together and light could not escape. But 380,000 years after the Big Bang, the universe cooled down sufficiently to the point that electrons and protons can combine to form neutral hydrogen. And this is a process called recombination. Now, this is extremely important because after recombination, for the first time, light could travel freely and actually reach us. And this is the oldest light we can see. Anything earlier than that is totally opaque because before that, light was too densely packed in the infant universe. Now, this oldest light we observe is the CMB I showed you previously. Now, after recombination, there is a long period of time known as the Dark Ages where light travel mostly unimpeded, and the universe is this dark and boring place. However, these small fluctuations in the CMB are now growing under the effect of gravity to form structure. And at sufficiently late times, you form galaxies, clusters, and superclusters, and inside the galaxies, stars turn on. And when stars turn on, that's the end of the Dark Ages, okay? And it's what we call the late universe. And once stars form, basically it's just a matter of time before we get to where we are today. So let me now go back to those big questions I mentioned previously and how we think we can answer them in cosmology. Okay, so the question of where do we come from? Well, we don't know what the initial singularity is, but we believe that the initial conditions for structure formation, so the initial conditions for those fluctuations you saw in the CMB, were set during inflation, which is this period of exponential expansion in the very early universe. This is 10 to the minus 32 seconds before, after the initial singularity. So that's mind-blowingly small amount of time, okay? And that set the initial conditions for where we are today. So in some sense, where we come from is inflation. What are we made of? Or what is the universe made of? Now, surprising as it may seem, the stuff we experience in our everyday life, atoms and so on, which we refer to as baryons or normal matter, makes up only about 5% of the energy budget of the universe. Now, there's a remaining 21%, which is in a form of dark matter. Dark matter is something which behaves as matter in the sense that it clusters with each other. It has attractive gravity. You can think of it in this way. And what dark matter does is it does a bunch of things, but among the other things, it creates more gravity, which helps structure form. If there wasn't dark matter, we couldn't have formed all the structure we observe today, like galaxies and so on, in time for us to be here now. And the remaining energy budget of the universe, this 74%, is in the form of dark energy. Now, dark energy is hard to understand. It's stuff with negative pressure. I don't expect you to, have an intuition for what that means. You can think of it as being stuff with negative gravity, which repels. And the reason we need dark energy is because at late times in the last billion years or so, we figure out that the universe is expanding at an accelerated rate. Now, if you threw in normal matter in the universe, something with positive pressure, the universe expands, but at a decelerated rate. The only way to make the universe accelerate is to throw in something weird like dark energy. Okay? And we don't really know what this dark matter and dark energy are. And where are we going? That's the final of the big three questions. So where are we going depends on a lot of things, including what's the shape of the universe, but probably where are we going depends mostly on what dark energy is. So depending on what the dark energy is, we can have various fates for the universe. I've shown just 3 examples here. One of these is a big crunch, where the universe eventually recollapses onto itself, like the opposite of a big bang. Or maybe we can continue forever expanding. We can go towards a big chill, where the universe expands faster and faster, and eventually, basically, the universe becomes a cold and boring place. We could even be going towards a big rip, where the universe expands so fast that eventually everything is ripped apart, including the atoms in your own body. That will happen many billions of years from now, so no need to worry. So just as a recap, here's the status of cosmology, what we think we know about the universe. We know that most of it is dark, okay? So we have this component of dark matter, which gives you the extra gravity which we need to form structure. We have this dark energy, which makes the universe accelerate at late times. We believe the initial conditions for this hot Big Bang expansion were set by a period of inflation. And finally, Einstein's theory of general relativity, which tells us how gravity behaves, seems to work quite well on all observable scales. And how fast is the universe expanding? The current rate of expansion of the universe is measured by this quantity h0, which is the Hubble constant. And we believe at the moment h0 is about 70 kilometers per second per megaparsec. What this means in practice is that if you move out from where we are by about 3 times 10 to the 19 kilometers, the apparent speed of expansion of the universe increases by about 70 kilometers per second. So it's expanding really slowly, okay? But it has an important effect. Okay, so is this everything? If the way I presented things, it looks like we figure out everything. And of course, we don't need researchers anymore. So why are taxpayers giving us their money? Well, of course, that's not quite true, okay? This picture, first of all, has many unsatisfactory points. What the hell are these dark components, first of all? And there are several open questions, some of which are really profound, which we haven't answered yet, and some of which we don't know how to answer. So in the next part of my talk, I'm going to present you this a selection of these 10 big questions. And I've color-coded these questions in the following way, in case you want to ask me some more questions on them. Questions which are in green are those I've worked on directly in my research. Of course, I haven't found a satisfactory answer yet, otherwise we wouldn't be discussing them. Questions in orange are those I haven't directly worked on with, but I would know my way around if I were to discuss them. And finally, there are two questions which are color-coded in red, which are very profound, and I have no clue how to answer them. And in fact, we are sort of groping in the dark with these final questions. Okay, so without further ado, what are these questions? Well, you might have guessed the first question is, what is the dark matter, which provides this extra gravity to help structure form? What is it made of? We have no clue. What is the dark energy which makes the universe accelerate at late times? That is even more mysterious than dark matter in more than one way. Is Einstein's theory of general relativity, let me say it in quotation marks, the correct theory of gravity on the largest scales? What is the shape of the universe? This is a subtle question. There's two different aspects. I'll come to it later. What is the expansion rate of the universe, h naught? I previously mentioned that h naught is around 70 kilometers per second per megaparsec. The truth is, we know it's about 70, but different probes of this quantity are not converging towards each other. And that has fueled a huge crisis in cosmology in recent years. A more technical question is whether our standard cosmological model is compatible with string theory. I should have color-coded this in green, apologies. Now, another question is, what set the initial conditions for the hot Big Bang expansion? So far, I've assumed that it was inflation, but the reality is we don't really know. This happened so early on in the lifetime of the universe that it's difficult to know if really it was inflation or something else which set these initial conditions. Where did all the antimatter go? So you probably know that we don't only have matter like electrons and protons and so on, but we also have antimatter, which is basically the same thing, but with opposite charge, like positrons and antiprotons. Now, the standard model of particle physics treats these two quantities, these two types of matter essentially in the same way. But clearly in our everyday life, we don't see any antimatter. So the question is, where did all of it go? Now, the two final questions, which are extremely deep, especially the final one, are what came before the Big Bang? And finally, and I'm sure the last one is a question we've all asked ourselves at some point, why is there anything at all? So why is there something rather than nothing? Why are we even here to discuss this? Isn't it simpler to have a totally empty universe with nothing at all? And now I'm going to go in turn through these 10 questions and try to give you a flavor of where we are standing at the present moment in cosmology. Question 1, what makes up the dark matter? Okay, of course, we have no clue. There's a whole zoo of so-called dark matter candidates. So what we think is that dark matter is made up of one or more new particles. And again, there's a whole zoo of possible dark matter candidates. One of the leading candidates is the so-called WIMP, weakly interacting massive particles. I don't know if it's in here somewhere, it should be. Another attractive class of candidates are so-called axions, which are ultralight particles, which solve other important problems. Now, a candidate which has gained a lot of interest in recent years is so-called primordial black holes. And these are black holes which form from the collapse of density fluctuations in the very early universe. So they are quite distinct from astrophysical black holes. I don't know if they are in here somewhere, but they should be. Now, another possibility, which however is quite unlikely, I would say, is that dark matter is not a new particle, but is a manifestation of a theory of gravity beyond general relativity. Now, it's quite hard to explain dark matter with modified gravity for many different reasons, which I can't get into here. But if you are curious, you can ask me questions during the appropriate session. Next question, what is the dark energy? Now, this is actually harder to answer than the question about dark matter because, as I mentioned, dark energy is even more peculiar. It has this negative pressure. You can think of it as having negative gravity. And what on earth has got negative gravity? So one of the leading candidates for dark energy is a so-called cosmological constant, which is basically just a constant you can add to Einstein's equations, preserving them. And other possible candidates include, some new particles like a quintessence field. Now, unlike dark matter, it is a very likely, I wouldn't say very likely, but it is much more possible. The dark energy is actually the manifestation of a breakdown of general relativity. So in other words, dark energy is a manifestation of modified gravity. Now, there's a sub-community in the field which believes that dark energy doesn't exist, that we've been, blinded so far. And dark energy is the effect of something called back reaction. This is a very complicated business, but back reaction is essentially due to Einstein's equations being nonlinear. And I would say it's not clear yet if back reaction can explain dark energy. It's a very complicated business. The jury is still out there on this question. Okay, next question. Is Einstein's general relativity valid on the larger scales? We don't know for sure yet. So far, general relativity, GR, seems to have withstood the test of data. There are hints for possible deviations from GR on very large scales. And on the theory side, there's a huge plethora of modified gravity theories, some of which you can see in this diagram here. The truth is that we will need future data, future more precise data, to really confirm whether GR is the right description of gravity on large scales, or whether these hints for deviations we are seeing are actually due to real deviations from GR, some new theory of gravity. Again, the floor is completely open here. What is the shape of the universe? Now, that's a great question. That's something, again, people have been asking themselves ever since the dawn of time. There are several creation myths which tell us that the universe, is standing on the back of elephants, which are standing on the back of turtles, and so on. Now, from the point of view of cosmology, there are two aspects to this question. One question is, what is the local geometry of the universe? In other words, what is the spatial curvature? Is the universe spatially flat, or is it spatially closed? Imagine a sphere. Or is it spatially open? Imagine a saddle. Another question is, what is the global geometry of the universe? What is the topology of the universe? Is it finite or infinite? Has it got a boundary or not? Is it simply or multiply connected? Is it a torus or whatnot? Cosmology is mostly well placed to answer the first question. And even then, we don't have a clear answer. There's been lots of debate in the recent year. If you read, popular science outlets like Quantum Magazine, Scientific American, you probably read articles about a debate about whether the universe is closed on itself like a sphere, so spatially closed, or flat. We haven't got a full answer to this question yet, even though it looks like the universe is indeed spatially flat. The second question about the global geometry is much harder to answer. I don't think we have a clear answer at the moment, not even close. Oh, that's a recent big question, but one which has unleashed a crisis in cosmology. What is the expansion rate of the universe h naught? So I mentioned previously it's around 70 in appropriate units. Now the problem is that you can measure h naught in different ways. You can use early universe data, this early root down here, and all measurements converge to around 67-ish. Or you can use direct late time measurements. And these late time measurements are converging towards 73-ish. Now, these two measurements don't converge with each other, okay? So imagine I'm measuring the height of a person from toes to head and then from head to toes. I should get the same answer, of course. And in this case, we aren't, okay? So that's a crisis which is known as the Hubble tension. Now, one way out is the following. The early measurements have to assume some particular cosmological model. They have to assume some model for the dark energy and for the dark matter. If this model is wrong, what we infer from the early universe is wrong. So one possibility is that our standard model of cosmology is wrong, and something funny has to have happened before the CMB formed. That's a fascinating problem. It's one on which there are several papers coming out every week. We have not found a compelling solution yet, not even close. Question 6, is our standard cosmological model compatible with string theory? I'm sure you all heard about string theory. There's been a question raised in recent years about whether our leading cosmological model, which is called lambda CDM, is compatible with string theory. And this is in the context of the so-called swampland program. It's sort of complicated to explain. I'll make the following example. Imagine you have this game, I think it's called Operation. You basically get parts of the human body, and you want to build a body from these pieces. And you've got only these basic blocks. Now, you would think, okay, I can just put stuff together and what comes out is a human. But of course, you could put, 2 heads, 4 legs, 5 kidneys, and what comes out is most certainly not a normal human, okay? Now, the same thing can happen here. In physics, we can think of building blocks which live at either high energy or low energy. Okay, we have a series of building blocks at low energy. We can put them together and create some theory which seems to describe the universe. But then we can ask ourselves, if I put these building blocks together in this particular way, can they actually correspond to something which comes from string theory? So in other words, the question is, if I put a bunch of legs and hearts and kidneys together, can I create a reasonable human person? And it looks like our leading cosmological model cannot actually come from string theory, given the way we've built it with our low energy building blocks, but rather falls within the so-called swampland, okay? Again, this is a rather complicated issue, and I won't discuss it any further here. Question 7, what set the initial conditions for the hot Big Bang expansion? So previously, I assumed that it was inflation which set these initial conditions, and more precisely, something which we call single field slow roll inflation, where basically inflation is just driven by some simple particle. The reality is that there are many other models of inflation beyond the simple one, which can, in principle, all give us the right initial conditions. And it's we haven't been convincingly able to tell one from the other so far. And again, there's been some controversy in recent years, especially in popular science media, as to whether inflation even qualifies as a good testable theory in the Popper sense. Again, I'll leave this to popular science. I won't discuss it here. question 8, where did all the antimatter go? Why don't we see any antimatter today, despite the standard model of particle physics treating matter and antimatter on equal footing? So this, we sort of know how to solve this. We need an asymmetry between matter and antimatter, which was created by a mechanism known as baryogenesis. So basically, if at very early times, there was an asymmetry of 1 part in 10 to the minus 9, so basically you need one more particle of matter every, what's that, 30 billion particles of antimatter. And then eventually they will annihilate, and you will be left with this remnant relic matter. There are many realistic models for baryogenesis. The problem is that we haven't seen anyone, so we haven't observed any of this convincingly in experiments so far, which is why the floor is still open on the question of how was the matter-antimatter symmetry generated. And now let's go to the last 2 questions. What came before the Big Bang? So if you ask this to people, they will probably frown because it's somewhat of an ill-posed question. So assuming space and time was created during the Big Bang, it's sort of ill-posed to ask what happened before that, because there simply wasn't any time. Time did not exist before then. The other reason it's hard to answer this question is that we need a complete theory of quantum gravity to address it. We need a theory which makes general relativity and quantum mechanics, or more precisely quantum field theory, talk to each other. And we haven't, and this is a theory we need to describe the very earliest stages of lifetime of the universe, which were really extreme. We don't have such a theory yet. We probably aren't even close to that, and which is why it's hard to answer the question of what happened before the Big Bang. There are a few proposals, for example, the Hawking-Hartle no-boundary proposal, which states that basically time emerged out of a state with pure space. There are proposals where the universe is born out of nothing, such as the Vilenkin-Linde proposal. The truth is, we have no idea yet. These are just theories, which are nice, testable to some extent, but we don't know the answer yet. And let me go to my final question, which is, why is there anything at all? There's actually a Wikipedia page dedicated to this question. I think it's called, Why is there something rather than nothing? I think it's probably the deepest question ever asked. It's a question which sort of brings us out of cosmology. It brings us to so-called cosmogony, which is trying to determine the cause of everything, the origin of everything. And this question flows out into philosophy and religion. So it's sort of beyond the scope of my talk. But here's a selection of proposed answers, which I think are unsatisfying to some extent. I obviously mean no offense to religion or philosophy, of course. So of course, one of the leading explanations is God, or many other names such as the universal designer, the supreme being, an uncaused cause, a substance which is its own reason for existence. Other philosophers like Hume have argued that, the universe might not need a cause to form, or Leftow argue that something might just exist rather than being caused. Bertrand Russell had a much more heads-on approach, saying, I see that something exists, so that's the end of the story. I shouldn't even question why it's existing. There are other arguments such as the anthropic principle, which states that, I'm here today to witness this, and therefore, whatever the reason, something has to exist rather than nothing. Because if there was simply nothing, I wouldn't be here to discuss it today, because I am something. Wilczek has coined the phrase "nothing is unstable" is attributed to Nobel Prize Frank Wilczek, a particle physicist, whereas other philosophers such as Randall have argued that nothing is impossible, even in an ontological sense. This is a very complex question. I don't think we have a convincing answer. I have no idea how to get around to answering this question. And I somewhat doubt it's even the task of cosmology to answer these questions. So I hope I haven't confused you even more than you were before. Okay, so in the final part of my talk, I'm going to give you some advice based on my personal experience on how to get into research in cosmology and try to make a job out of answering these questions, which is what I'm doing at the moment. So as a disclaimer, these tips are skewed and they are based on my personal experience. Okay, so they might be skewed in many different ways in that I've been mostly based in the Western world. I've been exposed to certain research environments. So take everything I say with a grain of salt. Always in science, you should always question everything. So question everything I say here as well. So just to give you some coordinates, here's my academic path so far. So in case you can't figure this out from my accent, I come from Italy. I did my high school in southern Italy. Then I moved up north to do my bachelor in physics. I then moved to the UK and to Australia to do my master's. For 1 year, I was a visiting researcher in Denmark. Then I did my PhD in Sweden. And after my PhD, I'm now a postdoctoral fellow until 2022 here in the UK at the University of Cambridge. And after that, it's unclear. There's a huge job insecurity issue, which I'll return to later. So a general academic path, assuming you make it all the way up the academic ladder, is usually you get a bachelor, then you do a master's, then you do a PhD. That's where real hardcore research usually starts, but it can start earlier by any means, absolutely. Then there's a bottleneck here in that we lose a lot of people who did their PhDs. Many don't continue up the ladder, but those who do usually go up to postdoctoral research. And it's not just one position. You usually have to do, 2 or 3 research positions. Now there's another huge bottleneck here. We lose a lot of postdoctoral researchers. Only very few become lecturers or assistant professors. And after then, you get permanent positions all the way up to full professor. Okay, so let me try to debunk some myth, which I've seen many times in forums, Quora, and so on. I think the biggest wrong myth is that if you want to do good research, you need to go to these top places like MIT, Harvard, Princeton, Cambridge, Oxford, whatnot. That's nonsense. Okay, there is extremely good research which is done outside of these top institutions. As an example, the Netherlands produces about half of the Hubble and Einstein Fellows, which are very prestigious postdoctoral positions in the US. And in particular, in Europe, the situation is much less hierarchical in the sense that the place where you do your PhD is not so important. What's more important is who your advisor is. It's a bit different in the US, but I'm speaking mostly for Europe. But again, there's a lot of excellent researchers who are not at these top places. And if you don't believe me, there's a very simple reason for that. In that often people, top researchers have a choice whether to, go to one of these top universities or maybe get a permanent position in their home country. And often they do choose the second possibility if there is such a possibility, which is why you get, again, many top researchers who are not based in the US or the UK. Now, another myth is that you have to wait until you're a PhD to start research. This is, again, completely wrong. I know a lot of people who have started way earlier during their master's or even during their bachelor. That's rare, but there are examples. And one of the organizers of this fair, O.M. Trivedi, is already doing very good research at a bachelor level. So if you have questions about this, you should ask him. Another thing is that if I look back at myself, 10 years ago, I probably was overthinking, just looking too much at university rankings. That is totally useless. University rankings are not important when it comes to finding a place where to do your PhD and research in general. What's more important is to find a supportive advisor, a supportive environment, which is a leader in the field you would like to work in. And oftentimes, certain institutions are leaders in a certain field, and you might find a better environment in these institutions than, say, at MIT, for example. Like if you want to work on modified gravity, there's no one working on that at MIT or Harvard or Princeton, for example. And whereas there's a lot of that going on in Europe. And there's also this, I think, wrong idea that there's a lot of geniuses in academia. That's, again, wrong. A lot of it comes from hard work, but I think a huge component is due to luck and serendipity. Serendipity is, in essence, the ability, it's not the ability, it's being in the right place at the right time, creating opportunities, or rather seizing opportunities which come. And I hope that for many of you, this fair is in some way the right place at the right time. I hope some of you will be able to seize important opportunities from being here. Now, of course, doing career in research is difficult. There's a lot of difficulties. There's a huge amount of competition. I say there are no geniuses, but there's a lot of really smart people out there who are working really hard. Now, this one on the right-hand side is the academic ladder I showed you previously. And now the problem is that at every rung of the ladder, the number of available positions decreases by an important number, like order 10 or more, which is why we get these bottlenecks I mentioned previously. And the thing is, you can't go down the ladder. So say I don't get a lecturer position, I can't just, go down, stay as a postdoctoral researcher forever, because I won't be hireable after a certain number of years, which is why many researchers end up working in the private sector. And there's nothing wrong with that. You shouldn't see this as a failure. Rather, in some way, it's a failure of this academic ladder, which isn't able to retain many excellent researchers. Now, one thing is you need to be flexible if you want to do research. You need to be open to changing country very often for short-term jobs. So again, if you look at my path, for example, which is not necessarily representative, I've changed 5 countries in less than 10 years, often for just 3-year positions at most. So that's something which can be difficult, especially if you have a family or kids and so on. And it's one of the reasons many people leave the ladder at some point. Now, here are some tips from my side. So the most important tip is that you should take everything I say with a grain of salt. Okay? Now, the second most important tip is that you should, if you want to do research in cosmology, you should get a very strong basis in mathematics, statistics, programming. So programming, I would say, try to learn at the very least Python. And these are all things you can do in your own time as well. You can self-learn. There's no huge difficulties with that. I imagine many of you are coming from developing countries, so you don't get as many opportunities as someone living in the US, for example. And so it's important for you to get a head start. Okay, so you need to do more than your peers who are living in for lack of a better word, first world countries. Start by reading the classic text. Once you've got your basis in mathematics and so on, start reading classic textbooks like Dodelson's Modern Cosmology, Weinberg's Cosmology, Mukhanov's Principles of Physical Cosmology. Once you get your base, these are going to be your Bible. and try to read the cosmology section on Archive. I put a link here on a daily basis. You won't understand probably any of it at first. It's great if you can just understand 1% at first. It's just to get a feel for what's going on in the field, what's hot and what's not. Learn to use these databases, Inspire and NASA ADS, to find your information on papers. And I'll say something which might sound a bit strange or unpopular, but I think something good came out of COVID, in that we have many talks, actually all talks are now happening online. There are many free recorded webinars, either on YouTube or on departmental websites. You should try and watch those which interest you. And many of these are from experts in the field. And it's something which you wouldn't be able to watch otherwise. I think it's a gold mine of information out there. Now, many of you are coming from developing countries. And again, it's hard to get opportunities there. I acknowledge it. It's just how things are. It's hard to get into, master's programs or PhD programs in the US, for example. So in my opinion, your Mecca in this sense should be ICTP. ICTP is the International Center for Theoretical Physics, named after Abdus Salam. It's got 3 hubs in the world. The main hub is in Italy, in Trieste. Of course, I'm biased because I'm Italian, but Trieste is a wonderful place. You should totally visit if you get the chance once the COVID pandemic is over. Now, ICTP in Trieste has a wonderful master's program, which is targeted to developing countries, okay? So I think you can only participate if you come from certain countries. And in the past years, they have prepared students from these countries, literally from all over the world, like from, I can think of Guatemala, Turkmenistan, Sudan, Indonesia, Timor-Leste, like literally all over the world you can find this. And these students have then gone on to do PhDs at top institutions. So I think you should really aim for Trieste if you can. So ICTP has 2 other hubs, one in South America, in I think either Rio de Janeiro or Sao Paulo. It's the ICTP South American Institute for Fundamental Research. Now, since 2017, I think there's a hub in Eastern Africa as well, the Eastern African Institute for Fundamental Research in Kigali, Rwanda. I think both have master's programs, which one could aim to as well. So short of Trieste, that's probably your next to best opportunity. If you're in Africa, you might want to look at AIMS as well. AIMS is the African Institute for Mathematical Sciences. There's a hub in Cape Town, I believe. There's a hub in Accra in Ghana. This is part of the Next Einstein program, which is trying to make science accessible to students in Africa. If you have some concrete research idea, don't be afraid to contact someone expert on the subject who might warn you if it's a stupid idea or might be able to help you, Don't necessarily expect an answer. Researchers are extremely busy. We get tons of emails every day. I would like to answer all of them. I simply can't, because if I answer all of them, I would be doing nothing else. But yeah, don't be afraid to contact people out of the blue in some cases. What's difficult in research is, sometimes it's very difficult to answer certain questions, but I think another difficulty is figuring out what questions are worth answering. Not all the questions are worth answering, of course. There are many unanswered questions, in some cases because the question is legitimately difficult, in some cases because the question isn't even worth answering in the first place. That's something you will learn with time. You need to develop a taste for the research questions you tackle, but remember that not everything which is unanswered is worth answering. And you will encounter many difficulties on your way, and don't give up, persevere. That's probably the most important advice I have for you. Okay, so I've come to my concluding slide. So cosmology is trying to answer quantitatively some of the deepest questions we ever ask, such as where do we come from? What are we made of? Where are we going? And as I argued, there are many captivating open questions. I've just spoken about 10 of them, like what is the dark matter made of? What's the shape of the universe? What is the dark energy made of? What happened before the Big Bang? Why is there anything at all? I've given you some advice for how to get into research in cosmology if you want to. But the most important advice is be tenacious. And I really hope the next big discovery in cosmology, which we really need, we've been waiting for it for many years, might come from someone in this audience. And I hope this fair, might just be for you being in the right place at the right time. So with that, I wish you all good luck in your careers. I hope you'll be able to get into research. And I look forward to answering your questions in the question and answer session. Bye.